In a new age of Watchmen, a team of individuals, pooling their talents and abilities, come together to bring analysis, reaction, and comedy to the fold. This is their chronicle. This is Accounting Arc.
Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Accounting Arc. We are all just off of a 2-week conference, a road trip for both, for various things. Where we were together a couple of weeks ago, which was pretty cool to be in person. And what we thought we'd reflect on today was really the whole concept of the imposter syndrome, because we all speak at events, and we were just debriefing on how even afterwards. We're still looking at ourselves going, I could have did better, or, I could improve that. So let's jump in, open the floor for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Liz, you just had a huge presentation on a pretty massive stage, larger than any stage I've ever been on. So I'd love to get your reflections on that.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be asked to be one of the keynotes at XeroCon this year. And it was a huge stage. There were like 5 screens that were larger than life, and actually getting to go backstage and seeing how they hooked everything up and the way they controlled these enormous giant screens. Oh, and there were smoke machines. Like that's the level of stage it was. Yes, the smoke machines were super cool, except I have asthma. So smoke machines while you're speaking on stage with no water bottle is actual torture, as it turns out. I did give them that feedback and they were laughing at me, but of course I presented it in a funny way, but I was serious, like it is torture. So I gave this keynote talking about building a firm, right? And the different stages of it, what it's like to scale, how that works, like what it was like going through the pandemic with a remote team, in the midst of major acquisitions and scaling. And it was a lot of fun to talk about. It was difficult to present it in a positive light because there's a lot of pieces of that story that are extremely difficult and close to my heart. As I feel like a failure in a lot of ways, and I think every entrepreneur does at some point or another. But I was able to present it vulnerably and authentically. And that was my goal, right? Was to talk to other firm owners or people in firms that are going through scale and be candid. Like it's not all sunshine and rainbows and roses, right? Like sometimes it is. Sometimes there's unicorns flying over things and everything is super happy, but sometimes it is you don't know what the answer is, and you're sitting in ambiguity and you have anxiety about every decision you make because it affects people's lives. And that's always like really difficult to have that pressure. So I, of course, as you said, am always going to be my own worst critic. And I think I could have done way better with more preparation, more practice, more thought behind each story that I told, or the way I incorporated different events during the scaling of the firm and the different pieces of growth. And I, despite all of that, despite walking off stage feeling like I did a good job at succinctly presenting, I accomplished my goals of vulnerability and authenticity, I also felt I could have done better. And walking around the expo hall after, I got stopped by at least 100 people who were like, thank you for sharing, this was incredible to hear. I don't like feeling alone in this journey. And I feel like most of these conferences, everybody talks about the sunshine and roses part of it, and they don't circle back to the vulnerable part and to the difficult part and to the messy middle. And so, it was really validating to get that feedback from perfect strangers that just randomly came up to me to tell me I did a good job. And that felt really good. But also like I was terrified leading up to going. I was so anxious, like it was a great experience. I will absolutely continue to push myself outside of my comfort zone and do more keynotes. And also, it was nerve-wracking.
It's really interesting, Liz, so you had that presentation. I simultaneously, I had a keynote presentation that was virtual. So it was a virtual keynote presentation for a conference. And, like it was a 1 hour presentation. After it was over, Zoom closed, and I was done to sit there and think about my performance. No follow-ups, no running into people in the hallways, nothing. And I think about our last conversation where we talked about the in-person conferences, and then I think about when I first started doing presentations at conferences. Of course, there was no virtual conferences then. Everything was personal. And I think probably the thing that kept me coming back was the after the session, talking to people to find out how you impacted them, or what they held on to, what was meaningful. So it's really interesting to kind of contrast those experiences, and now to have virtual presentations where it's just like, the Zoom closes and it's silence, and then you're left to just think about all the things you would like a redo on.
I am
Can be
so
difficult.
I am so happy I did not have that experience on this particular keynote because of how big
Yeah,
it was. Because I would have just been in my head the whole time. And
yeah,
I think that's human nature, right? Is to question your performance, and especially for high achievers, you know.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think a lot of people realize that is the thing for high achievers, is that validation, that we are still doing good. I know that's one that I struggle with still today, because it's like, who do I go and get validation from? And it's usually people like the two of you, where you're like, yeah, keep going. I'm like, okay, good, thanks. I know I need to keep doing this. But it is, I think, same here, because just listening to what you said, Byron. Yeah, I don't think, if I hadn't started off doing the in-persons and having people come up afterwards, because that's always to me a good sign of a presentation, is that afterwards they come up to you and somebody says, oh, thank you. Or the other one is, like Liz says, you're just randomly walking and people will stop. They'll stop a conversation at their middle of to say thank you for that presentation. Those are the ones that mean the most to me, because that you really impacted them if they have to break another conversation to say something to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. That's, and it's not even like, it's not even about like the ego boost of that. For me, and I think probably both of you, when I stand up on a stage to give a presentation, like I am hoping that my message lands somewhere and then it matters to somebody else, and that it impacts, and getting that reinforcement is just kind of that, like, checkbox to maybe not stay in my head and be hypercritical about because clearly it landed somewhere. And I think about that when I'm a participant, especially in virtual conferences. I'll make extra effort to try to reach out to the presenter to like give them some sort of confirmation, because as people who are trying to do their best, I know how meaningful it is to hear from somebody.
Well, on top of that, I think the virtual environment, like there are ways people can be interactive, right? There's Q&A, there's
Yep.
reactions, like it depends on the webinar platform, of course, but there are ways for people to be interactive, which I don't think most people that are not presenters as well have any insight into what that means to the presenter. Because I can tell you my favorite presentations are the ones in small forum where you can have interactions and conversations, and you
Yep.
can bring out the knowledge of the audience on the topic you're speaking of and truly elevate the room by having more diverse thought. And it's hard when you're doing a keynote or a webinar or something where there is no direct real interaction as you're going. Granted, it's easier in person because, while I could not see the audience because the lights were so bright, I could hear them. I could hear when they laughed
Yep.
at my jokes, or when there was like silence because what I had said was so impactful. And you can feel that energy in person, which is way more important to a presenter than I think it is to the participants, right? Because
Yeah.
we're gleaning all of that to, keep going. But I'm going to address like one of your earlier points around, getting into speaking and like having the experience of standing up on stage, or, getting into webinars or however you're presenting. I think each individual holds different experiences that make them who they are, right? And each individual approaches topics from a different perspective. And if they're able to, communicate that effectively, right? That's kind of the base level for being put on a stage is,
Sure.
can you effectively communicate thoughts and ideas and teach people, right? And as long as they're capable of those base level pieces of, the requirement, every single individual has something important to say or has a perspective that's different than yours or something that you can learn from them. Like I was talking to my friend Kristen Keats yesterday, who did a webinar last week around outsourcing, right? And what to do when you're outsourcing your staff level people to another country. How do you train them? What are some best practices? Like thinking through those things. And she was like, oh, you already know all this stuff, like you don't really have to listen to that. And I'm like, no, but every single webinar I listen to, every presentation I go to, every conference I go to, I learn something. Whether it be the way you're thinking about it is different for me, your tips and tricks are slightly different than things I have tried, or validation that what I have tried is something that people believe is working, right? Or, I've dedicated myself to doing it this way. Like, do you think that's the right way? Like, great. It's wonderful to hear somebody else talking about that. So to anyone that wants to get into that type of, that part of our industry, the speaking side of it, the knowledge sharing, like whoever you are, you have thoughts that are different from us. Like we always need new thoughts and ideas, and that's how the industry gets better. Okay, rant over.
You're bringing up, I think, a really good point around. So when I first started speaking, I felt like I really had to be the expert and I had to go and research everything. And for context, I was that A+ student in high school, right? And in college, I was the one everyone looked to after the teacher looked to me to like, what's the answer? How do you get the answer? Right. And so coming from that type of a overachiever really mindset, that I had to dot all the T's, cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and really have like, I need to be able to answer any question anybody puts up in front of me. Like that was my first several actually presentations were around that way. And now I think, like you said, Liz, for me, it's coming at it more from well, this is the way I approach this. Do you approach this the same way? Do you agree or do you disagree? And before I would be so worried someone's going to disagree. But now I'm kind of like, yeah, come disagree. Let's have a discussion. Let's really work this through, because probably something you're saying does have some relevance. And we can both be better for having understood different ways to approach the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember early in my career when I first started being asked to present on topics, feeling the same way, Donnie. I nauseated myself trying to go as deep as I could and memorize as much data as I could so that I could, throw this, fact of bullets on a slide and put it in front of people and feel confident that I was right. And I think that over time, I realized exactly what you're talking about. It was actually less about the fact patterns or facts that I was presenting. It was really about the conversation and my perspective on the facts. And, Liz talked about in her presentation, the vulnerability and being yourself. I can remember for me, a turning point was when I realized that presentations were really just conversations that I was having with friends. And if I could approach it as that and not as being this authoritative body who's standing up and puffing out his chest, it really changed my approach to presenting to where I feel more comfortable. I'm still going to criticize every aspect of it. And they just shared the 2 presentations that I did last week, and I've watched them both just in absolute agony watching them, but I want to find opportunities to improve. But really just changing it to that conversation and perspective of conversation rather than, being an instructor that's just teaching facts really changed a lot for me.
So I think I do a combination of things. I over prepare because if I don't, I have too much anxiety to do the thing. So I have to over prepare for myself to make sure I am confident and comfortable in what I'm talking about. But I do it from a combination perspective, right? Like I prepare by researching the underlying, data, statistical studies, anything that contributes or detracts from the message I am trying to accomplish in my presentation so that I know it and I understand it and I use it to support my argument. And then also use it to say, hey, I can play devil's advocate here. Like, here is a study that doesn't support this, and this is why. So, how do we ensure that, we miss those pitfalls, right? Whatever it is, or however you want to present it. But at the same time, it gives me a breadth of knowledge to go up and feel confident. Where if somebody does ask me a question off the wall, I can always say, hey, I'm going to get back to you. Like, I don't know the answer to that. That's a wonderful question. Like, what do you think? Like, what are you thinking in there to come up with that to begin with? Like, let's converse about it. And then on the flip side, I can also say, like, hey, I know there was a study on this. Like, let's go find it and look at what the results were. Because I might not know off the top of my head exactly what the results were. I didn't write it into my notes, but I do have a breadth of knowledge around the topic I'm presenting. And I find that that helps a lot from not only like my internal perspective, but also the perspective of people that attend my sessions, right? It gives some validity that I should be on stage beyond just I have opinions and I've done stuff, right? Because there are plenty of people with opinions who have done stuff. So why put me on stage? Like, what's the differentiating factor besides I'm willing to do it?
I'm kind of in the middle of, I think, the way both of you approach it. So I definitely don't over research anymore. And that's purely a factor of time. I just don't have the time anymore. Although I do tend to write presentations now around things that I'm seeing a pattern in research or things that I'm reading. And I normally
Or
will
things you're super interested in. Like, that's
right,
the
things
other
I'm
side of
passionate
it.
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
But
you research a lot. And I know this because I have attended a ton of your sessions. And also the topics you present on are things you care about. So you by default have absorbed all this knowledge about it previously because you're paying attention to it because you care. Sorry, I'll stop interrupting you.
no, true. No, and I think that's a really great point because that was kind of the thing I had to choose too was, am I going to be this super in-depth presenter on these particular things? And it was, well, after a while, you're like, oh, I can't read another standard or I can't go through a whole nother whatever practice guidance book on something. And so I actually chose to now not do super deep presentations. I do kind of, to me, what's more mid-level presentations in depth in terms of what we're going to. But the contrasting on Byron, who's doing more of a conversation, which that, by the way, is the approach that I take with panels. But when I'm doing my own presentations, because I'm an introvert, very much an introvert, I actually mentally have to switch on and say, this is a show and I'm going to put on a good show. Not meaning show like flashy thing, but show meaning I'm going on stage, I'm performing, I'm delivering. And part of that delivery, though, is creating that connection with the audience. And that's probably, as both of you have said, to me is probably the most important thing, and which makes me, I think, stand out all of us actually stand out as presenters, is we focus on that connection with the audience, even if we do it in our own different ways.
Yeah, no doubt. It's definitely been an evolution for me. I think, and something for me that has changed over the years is, so in the early days, the prep I was doing was like the knowledge download prep, but I was not preparing to go on stage. I was creating slides and said, I will find the words when I'm on stage. And that was my approach for many years.
I mean, that's kind of your approach to life, though. I will find the words.
That's fair. That's fair. It's and part of it was too, because even if I did prep, I would find when I got on stage, like, that plan would go completely out the window, and then I would do something new. So I'm like, why am I even preparing? But I have changed that, recently, where I am now, actually doing a couple run throughs prior to getting on stage. And kind of to your point, Donnie, like, I realize that there's a job to do. And I think also getting paid changes the formula as well. For many years, I was a volunteer presenter where the presentations was like for sales and marketing purposes and networking opportunities, but not really being paid other than, just travel and admission and those types of things. But as soon as somebody's like dropping a check in the mail, that, I feel like kind of changes the formula where I have some obligation to really make sure that performance is good beyond my taste.
Yeah, I don't care if it's paid or unpaid. For me, I have to practice and be ready for things, although I do have the ability to bullshit very well. So even if I'm given a slide deck the day before and a topic, I will make sure it comes across as though I am extremely well prepared, even if internally I am freaking out because I have not prepared to the extent of which I would like to. And that has happened multiple times. I can tell you that. I have been asked to do webinars with no notice and short things. And most of the time, actually, pretty much all the time, unless there's a conflict with something for my son, I will say yes. Like, I'll be there. I will make sure this webinar goes off without a hitch because your presenter originally, has the flu or whatever is going on, right? But I think it's interesting, kind of all of our journey into presenting. So I'd love to hear, like, Donny, what was your first presentation or the first one that like sticks out in your mind, and how did you get into this side of the industry?
The one that always sticks in my mind was the first time I presented at the national level at what was AICPA Prac Tech or Tech Plus, Prac and Tech Plus.
Yeah.
Back in 2008. I was actually asked to co-present with someone from, I think it was Oracle or some super big. So even more, I was like, okay, here's me. What was I? Probably 33-ish, somewhere around there. Presenting with this person from a really big reputable company, and we were talking about business intelligence. So the advantage that I had with a lot of these, and I had presented at the state society level, so at the state level before that, was tech was new, and all of these things were not things that people in general were comfortable with, especially not accountants at that time. So I had that advantage that I was talking about something that was very different than what the audience would normally have known. Of course, that one I definitely completely over prepared, practiced multiple times. Now, if I practice once, I'm usually lucky. Usually I skim the slides and I look, okay, I kind of know what I'm going to talk about, and like Byron said, I kind of go with the flow of where the question's coming from, what are people responding to. But that's definitely the big one. Was the big one
That's
for me.
awesome. And how did you get asked to do that? Like, where did that come from?
That was a be careful what you criticize one. So part of the reason I ended up on the planning committee for Tech Plus was because in the previous year, in 2007, I had said I wouldn't attend this conference. The agenda doesn't make sense. The presentations, I didn't even go, but I'm looking at the presentations. These are not something that's of valuable to me. So I got put on the committee the next year, and then they were like, well, we need someone to present on this. And I'm like, well, I kind of know it. I can talk on it. And they're like, okay, you're in. So be careful what sometimes you criticize.
Always that. How about you, Byron?
It's actually funny that Donny mentioned the '08 Tech Plus, because that actually is the same one that sticks out for me. I almost wonder if that's when we met, Donny.
I was just thinking that. I think it is.
Yeah, I very much think so. And before that, I was doing various things. I think we've talked about it before on prior episodes, but I got super involved with the Maryland Association of CPAs very early in my career. And through that, I was given a lot of opportunities to just be in a lot of different rooms. And I'm confident I had done some like smaller presentations at the state level. And, somehow, I'm not even quite sure how, I ended up on that agenda for '08 Tech Plus and at the Bellagio. And that was definitely, I think, the first presentation. I'm pretty sure it was like a technical presentation, because that was when I had made my transition to technology. So it was really geared for IT professionals that were in the accounting profession. So I really felt that that was where I had to be like super like technical and really knowledgeable because I was presenting to my peers. And that one definitely steps out. So I don't know how I got asked. I'm sure it was through somebody I knew. And Liz, I wanted to build on a point you made earlier about saying yes to these types of opportunities, because I'm sure I got that opportunity because I had said yes to something before that, and probably yes to something before that. And a lot of young individuals that I speak to that are trying to like get on the circuit, they want to become presenters. I'm finding a lot of them are very particular in what they say yes to. They're saying no almost more than they are saying yes, and it's because, it's too far outside of, what they feel is their lane, or they feel the audience is the exact audience they want. And I have kind of always had this, like, I say yes a lot to these opportunities. It gives me more swings at bat. It gives me more exposure. You never know who's in the room. In fact, the presentation that I did last week was for the government auditing and accounting conference, which I'm not super involved in, but I got a follow-up email from another state society based on that content, wanting to do some more presentations there. So you just don't know. And so I would say probably for me, my progression has just been about saying yes and yes and yes and yes. I ended up in Arizona one time speaking to Liz's business partner many years, in fact, possibly before I even knew Liz. So all these things happen from saying yes and taking those opportunities.
I had to go look it up just because, Byron. So you presented with Tom Hood on CPAs and the virtual world of Second Life.
That was Second Life. That's exactly
Oh,
what it
I love
was.
Second Life.
Yeah.
The prospect
Yes.
of having a whole virtual world, that was so cool.
I established the first accounting firm in Second Life in '08. Oh
I
my
tried to
God.
convince Grant Thornton to build their training in there, and they thought I was nuts. I mean, I was a little nuts, but like, whatever. So my story is a little bit different in that I got involved when I worked for Grant Thornton in the national training. So I would help develop and then present their training for the tax team at a national level, which of course, like for firms that size, they all go to, a lot of them go to the Q Center outside of Chicago, which is, I have a love-hate relationship with my memories of that place. But, I spent months one year presenting like the new hire training, the level one training, the level two training. And it was just like a week of one, a week of the next one. And it just went down the line. And that was truly my first exposure to presentations or training really at all. And it was very technical training. It was training that I had helped develop, which I appreciated. I had done all of the like case studies for the workshop. So I knew the material inside and out because I built it. And when you're building technical material, you have to know it inside and out. But they had hundreds of people at every single week, and a few of them, it was really big rooms and auditorium type presentations. So I got exposure to being quote unquote on stage from very early, and I had started my career there much too young. So I was like 22, 23, getting up on stage teaching these national trainings. And it gave me a taste for what it's like to be in front of an audience, and what it's like to have the ability to help people expand the way they're thinking. And that was what I really like clung on to and enjoyed. But it wasn't until about, I think, the first presentation that I felt was like a major achievement. Was at the one of the first ZeroCons. Actually, it was 2015 in Denver, and they had asked me to do like a TED talk there, as well as like a panel on the main stage. And it was like the Denver Performing Arts Center, and so it was like a really cool stage. And that was impactful, and it gave me like a little bit of a different audience, and
Mhm.
understanding that there were people outside of just technical accounting, which is where all of my presentations previously had been, and people that were interested in different thought processes and innovation and structures and the stuff that actually gets me excited, right? Like I can be a good technical accountant if I want to be, but generally speaking, I don't care enough to like focus in on those technical topics and show up at a, thing. So I had presented at a few AICPA conferences, including Edge, which was a lot of fun. But most of it was, technical type topics prior to that ZeroCon, where I really realized I could talk about anything, and people would be excited to have me talk about anything. And that understanding got me more into kind of like the circuit or whatever. But shortly thereafter, I think it was like 2018, I had to stop saying yes because I was gone. Like I also had a baby in 2016, so like that kind of put a little bit of a damper on the travel. And then I was like, it was 3 weeks a month. I was presenting at something in 2018. And so I was like, okay, well, if people want me to talk this bad, they can start paying me. And then I put like a filter of, okay, if you're not going to pay me, I'm not going to travel. Like I might do a webinar, but I'm not going to take the time to travel and be away from my family. You can find someone else, right? And that actually made me more attractive to people, which still blows my mind. So 2019, I had even more speaking engagements. And then 2020, the pandemic hit. So it all went virtual. And then we went back to the free model. And now I'm still building up the paid speaker model.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
That's an interesting transition. So I don't think a lot of, especially students, realize that there is this paid speaker model, or the other perception might be that it's, and I think of it kind of aligning to the whole social media influencer one, where it's like, yeah, you can pay me to promote something. How do you guys feel about this? What is this transition into paid speaker? And Byron, you brought it up before too, where you said, well, now once I got started getting paid to speak, it changed your approach to what you were thinking. So how did you transition into this paid speaker model?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think it was also part of my career transition, because for me, we've talked about I owned an IT company, and I felt like at the time that was really my marketing. So for me, just being on stage at that time was really valuable to me. And that, as my career and my roles have changed to where I've realized that being on stage is no longer a marketing initiative to me. It's really about sharing valuable content for an audience. That was part of the transition. And then the second part, kind of similar to what Liz said, was I have reached the point where I do need to say no more often and be a little bit more intentional. So that became one of the filters for me as well. I'm definitely probably not even as far along. I know definitely, Donnie, you've been charging for speaking for much longer than I have. Liz, I'm assuming yours is more recent, but I'm still not 100% like as far as charging. So it's been a kind of an awkward transition, to be honest, but I have realized that people do value what I have to say, so it hasn't turned into as many no's as I expected it to become.
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, like I will not do a presentation that I don't wholeheartedly believe in the content. And
Yes.
I would say 90% of the time, I pick the topic and I develop the content. And they can come to me and say, like, hey, I have a slot to fill, whether it be a breakout session at a conference or a keynote or, something else. Here's what we're thinking. Here's the audience. And, if I'm going to take it on and get paid for it, I will do an exceptional job. And that is why I over prepare for things and I prepare my own content. And I am, thinking about things from the perspective of like, what will benefit your audience? What do I know and have experience in that I can bring to the table that makes a big difference here, and ideate with the planners or, whoever it is. And that's not to say I don't do things for free. I absolutely do. If there's like a women's group of firm owners or a queer group or people that are thinking about this from a different perspective and they don't have a lot of people that are experienced or representative of who they are as a group that they can put on stage, I will 100% of the time say absolutely, I will come speak to this group and be my authentic self in that. And that's something that I think is different from some other speakers in the industry. And I also think important, like, I think it's important that we have representation on stage and then people understand that, it's no offense, Byron, but it's not all like, cis white men in this industry that have opinions, that have knowledge, that have the experience and have tried things that other people haven't. I do believe that everybody, like, no matter anything else, like every single human has some experience that they can contribute in a presentation. I also know most people fear public speaking more than death. So there's a limited pool of people like us that are crazy enough to do this and push our boundaries and push our, human reactions to the level to feel confident to do it. And that, has value. It really does. But I think I figured out a few years ago, like I have experimented in my firm in ways most people never do. They think about it, they dip their toes in it, they build out change management stuff and innovation plans, but they don't jump off the deep end and like immerse themselves in what if and let's see what happens when we do this. And I do believe that that brings a lot of value where I can speak not only from my experience, but from the research that guided those decisions in my firm.
Definitely agree with you on that. But my firm has probably been my biggest experiment, continues to be my biggest experiment. We're on year 23.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're really pushing on, and which thankfully, because of the good research, we have things that we developed in 2004, 2008 that still stand today. We're getting to the point now where we've grown enough that we maybe need to tweak them a little, but when we've been evaluating them, it's maybe a 10 or at most 15% change that we're making. But I agree with you. It comes back, I think, again to passion. What are you passionate about? Those are definitely things that I will transition towards. The other thing when I transitioned towards paid speaking was making sure that I knew that I could have an impact with whatever it was I was addressing. And eventually the other thing I ended up having to do was making sure that I was driving the topic, as Liz shared as well, because if I'm speaking about something that I'm passionate about, then I'm going to enjoy it. The audience is probably going to more enjoy it. I also look for things that are different and that other people aren't talking about, because that makes me more versatile as a speaker. And the other one that I know helps get me repeat year after year type of things is to have different things every year. Some speakers you listen and it's the same thing, and you go multiple ones and it's the same thing. And it's the year after year, it's the same thing.
And it's just like, here are the updates. Like, oh.
That's right. And just to build a little bit tangential, but build a little bit on something you both said. I think what has really been valuable for both of you, Donny and Liz, is you both do look outside of the profession. So I think your firms become a reflection of things you see outside of the profession and ideas, and so does your content and your input and your perspectives, which makes you both a unique voice. I think for those who are thinking about wanting to present and get on stage, it is really valuable to look outside of the four walls that we sit in most days and gaining those outside perspectives. Otherwise, you're just echoing what's already in the chamber.
Yeah. So one of the most impactful presentations I did this year was also the easiest, to be frank. It was a panel discussion at the SDX Open Banking um, conference that they had in DC. And these are mostly people from banking institutions that are on the technology teams or are in charge of how the data is handled, right? So mostly, engineering type bankers. So it's a very, very male dominated conference, mostly white and Indian descent for, the audience, very few women in the audience at all. And, a friend of mine who's on their board asked me to speak, John Getchell, and he basically was like, look, we need the perspective of a business owner and somebody that works with business owners on a daily basis because these bankers don't know. They don't understand how the data is being used and what it means to these businesses. And furthermore, what that means to the economy, right? They don't understand the flow of information post their minute perspective of their one bank. And I, talked about things I see on a daily basis with my clients, with my firm, like how we use this data, what we're doing from like analytics perspective and how, more real-time information leads to better business decisions and results. And I gave, a few examples from economic studies as well as, like survey-based research and things that we have seen internally and how it impacts our client base. And I have never had so many old men come up to me after a presentation saying, this was amazing. That was the most supportive group of men I have ever been in my entire life. And I was so proud of them for accepting me on the stage from nowhere to talk about the impact of the work that they do and what that means. And I bring that up to say, even if you're early in your career, like you have experience, right? Like you've experienced onboarding at a firm, right? Or you've experienced the interview process. Like you can talk about it from your perspective, and that is valuable information, right? Like I, as a firm owner, want to hear from students, like, what is your experience? How has it been through this recruiting process? What did it look like? What impacted your decisions? Like, how about your friends? Like, let's take a poll of all the people that I don't have access to, or the knowledge that you have in this perspective or in your first few years. Like, what did you do at the firm you were at? What did that mean for you? What are, you know what I mean? Like all of those topics are valuable to people that are thinking about pipeline, that are thinking about like how to improve these processes at our firms or how to think about it from a bigger perspective. And I think so many people take for granted their own experience and their own, value and what they can bring to the table, and even what their network. Like, just talk to your friends. Like, and come tell us what is this, right? And I think that that's so vitally important to hear perspectives from not only like diversity, but also from like a diverse age range of people. Okay, I just keep going on rants today. Sorry, guys.
They're all great.
I like that rant. Yeah, I think that's something that we don't see enough of too. And I feel like this may be me stereotyping. A lot of the younger generation is like, yeah, that was bad and I'm not going to deal with it. Done. When instead it should be, that was bad. I want to help improve that and speak up. And I know immediately I can already hear the people going, well, we try to say that and no one listens to us. To me, that's part of that sign is that may not be the right place for you, because we should be seeing more of these where and maybe we're just right. I say I would put me and Byron because I know we're about the same age in this. Maybe we're getting into that older generation and we need to start listening more to the younger generation and what they're thinking and their responses.
It's a great point. As
I
painful as
also
it
think
is, it's a great point.
as a profession, we have switched from the generation before you having a lot of no, we know the answers, like just do your job mentality, to we might not know the answers, so give us some input mentality. And of course, that's like a gross generalization. There have always been people of all age and all, generations that have been willing to hear and listen to feedback. And I'm lucky to have known a lot of them in my career. And also, there's always room for that shift to be in a more vocal and prominent place.
That's actually also a really good point. I think as a speaker, you mentioned it earlier, I think, Liz, about being open to hearing that other side. That in because I remember that was something that I used to do when I first started speaking was I would immediately shift into defense. As soon as somebody questioned something, I would switch into defense. Well, these stats say, and this is what the regulation, or this is what the standards say, and this is all the stuff. When instead switching and engaging them into a conversation to really explore, well, hey, let's understand where are you coming from and what are you, is there any validity there? How can we adjust the way that we're approaching this?
Yeah.
Well, and I think, being open to learn from unsuspecting sources is part of what it takes to be a good presenter, right? And I took a lot of time practicing, unlike Byron, who just started practicing in recent years because he's so naturally charismatic. Some of us actually had to learn how to do this. And I, realized I was working with Zero on a bunch of like webinars and other like smaller presentations at state societies or other things that they were sponsoring. And they had asked me to help them as presenting their content effectively. And internally at Zero there was a woman named Brandy who was in charge of their design and development, and before that she worked at a ed tech startup and was like helping to coach the teachers on like how to speak and present, and she had a lot of experience coaching speakers. And they didn't really advertise that, but I would ask for her feedback. I'd record my session, I'd send it to her and say, hey, can you give me feedback? And she was the only person that gave me pages of feedback, like pages. She would literally take notes the entire webinar and be like, minute 12, 17 seconds. Like, you said 4 times. Stop that. That's a vocal filler. Be cognizant of it. Let's do this instead. And she went every single presentation that I sent to her, I got feedback from. And she ended up joining my team for a couple of years, mostly from the perspective of I wanted somebody that would give that feedback and help coach me into a better presenter. And I recommend to anyone that's serious about that to find resources that are capable of doing that for you, whether it be in your industry or not. It truly does not matter if they understand the topic. If you're a good presenter, you can present it to anybody. So just another aside of, I do believe practice is important. I do believe getting feedback, critical feedback and coaching from the perspective of let's make you better is important, and being open to challenges as well, from not just how you're presenting, but what you're presenting and what you're saying, and ensuring that you're thinking before you speak, which is another thing I struggle with.
Well, and it's interesting, and we probably need to wrap up soon, but maybe this is a conversation for another day. But I think part of improving is the filtering through the feedback, because there's a lot of feedback you get as a presenter that is not constructive, that is not useful, does not help you to be better. And it's really easy to I won't say obsessed, but to get distracted by that type of feedback and get beat down a little bit. So to your point, Liz, finding someone who can really give you good constructive feedback that will truly help you to be a better presenter is a game changer. And there's definitely been a variety of people throughout my career who have actually spent the time to give me like loving constructive feedback that has been helpful to me. And that changes, because it's easy to look at some of the reviews and some of the feedback from these people who, one, had never sat on a stage before to speak and want to tell you, what a miserable job you did, and feel like you shouldn't continue to do it because of that.
Yeah, I can give you one I got early on in my presentation career. It was a 1-star speaker review, and the comment was, she spoke too much. I was like, I'm not sure how this works. Like, can someone explain this to me? Because I was supposed to be the one.
That's actually the job.
Yeah, that was the objective, right? And so I bring that up to like bring some levity to the conversation, because some people they will comment on anything. They'll be like, I don't like her voice. I've gotten that one a lot. Or this person's too short. And I'm like, cool, like I can't control the height of the podium, like, yeah, I'm short. I'm sorry that like I was cut off because you were too close to the front, but there are things that are outside of your control and things that people will comment on that you kind of have to take and be like, okay, like
Yep.
that's a thing. Like next time I'll ask for a step stool. Like, I don't know.
Sir, one last quick one on that one. One of the comments I got was, I couldn't do work because there was too many group exercises.
Yeah. Yep.
Again, mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Well, I hope all of you got some tips there on what you can do to start out and perhaps some of the journey to become a professional speaker. We'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.
Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
one.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.